Some people can be drowning inside and still answer every text with one calm word. They can sit beside you for years and never let you touch the real story. Not because they have nothing to say. Because somewhere deep down, silence started feeling safer than being known. If you keep everything to yourself, you probably know that strange double life. The one where your outer self looks steady, capable, and almost impossible to read. And your inner self feels crowded, loud, tired, and painfully awake at night. People often mistake this for mystery. Sometimes they even call it strength. But a lot of the time, it is just protection that got so practiced, it became personality. You learn how to hold your own storms without making a sound. You become the person who says, "I'm good," before checking whether that's even true. You answer questions with just enough honesty to avoid more questions. You tell the story, but never the wound underneath it. You share the fact, but not the feeling. And after a while, even the people closest to you only know your edited version. That kind of hiding usually does not begin in adulthood. It starts much earlier, in rooms where your feelings felt inconvenient, traumatic, or unsafe. Maybe no one taught you how to open up without consequences. Maybe your sadness got ignored until it became quiet. Maybe your anger got punished until it turned inward. Maybe you learned that vulnerability made other people uncomfortable. And when that happens enough, the nervous system remembers. It starts treating emotional exposure like danger, even when no real threat is present. So you adapt. You become careful. You become private in ways that look mature from the outside. But inside, it often feels less like maturity and more like permanent bracing. You think before speaking, then think again, then decide silence is easier. You rehearse honest conversations that never actually happen. You explain yourself perfectly in your head and almost never out loud. And people assume you have no needs because you present them so cleanly. That is one of the loneliest parts. When your self-containment becomes the reason nobody sees how much you're carrying. You can be exhausted and still look composed. You can be heartbroken and still sound reasonable. You can be desperate for comfort and still pull away when it finally appears. Because when someone gets close, another part of you gets alert. Not always because you distrust them. Sometimes because being truly seen feels unfamiliar enough to trigger shame. You start wondering what will happen if you stop managing the impression. If they see how sensitive you really are. How much you overthink. How easily small things stay with you for days. How one dismissive comment can echo longer than a dozen compliments. People who keep everything to themselves often notice more than they admit. They read tone changes. They catch pauses. They feel the mood in a room before anyone names it. That sensitivity can make them wise. It can also make them tired in ways other people never notice. Because when you feel a lot, but express very little, all that energy stays inside, it has nowhere to go. So it turns into tension in your jaw, a heaviness in your chest, racing mind when the house finally gets quiet. And this is where people misunderstand the private person. They think secrecy means emotional distance. But often, the truth is almost the opposite. You feel too much, not too little. You hold back because the inside already feels intense. Adding exposure on top of that can feel unbearable. So you keep managing yourself. You keep shrinking the mess into something presentable. You become incredibly skilled at self-containment. You cry alone, recover alone, and process entire heartbreaks in silence. Then someone says, "Why didn't you tell me?" And you almost laugh, because you do not even know where you would start. How do you explain years of learning not to need too loudly? How do you explain the instinct to disappear before becoming a burden? How do you explain that asking for care can feel more painful than going without it? A lot of private people are not trying to be difficult. They are trying to avoid the old ache of being misunderstood. Because once that becomes a pattern, hiding starts to feel efficient. Why open up if you will just have to explain the explanation? Why reveal the softest part of yourself to someone who might handle it carelessly? Why risk being seen halfway when you have survived by staying mostly unreadable? So you become selective, not in a cold way, in a quietly defensive way that even you may not fully notice. You tell yourself you just like dealing with things alone, and maybe part of you really does. Solitude can feel cleaner than conversation. It can feel more honest than being comforted badly. It can feel like the only place where you do not have to translate yourself. But there is a cost. When everyone becomes private, healing starts to feel private too. You stop expecting support. Then you stop recognizing when you actually need it. Then something strange happens. You become the safe person for everyone else. People confide in you because your silence feels steady. They trust you because you do not make everything about yourself. They feel calmer around you because you listen deeply and react carefully. And yet, very few of them realize you almost never lean back. You become the emotional container. The one who understands everyone and explains nothing about their own pain. That role can feel meaningful for a while. then it starts hollowing you out. Because being deeply needed is not the same thing as being deeply known. And many people who keep everything to themselves confuse those two for years. They think love is being useful. They think closeness is being dependable. They think connection means staying available without becoming visible. So their relationships start looking one-sided in subtle ways. They know everyone else's history. Nobody knows what ruined their last month. They can describe another person's attachment patterns with painful accuracy. But if you ask what they feel, they say, it's hard to explain. At work, this can look like competence. You handle pressure without showing much panic. You solve problems quietly and rarely complain. People trust you because you seem low maintenance. But being low maintenance is not always peace. Sometimes, it is just a lifetime of self-erasure with better posture. You stay late without asking for help. You absorb tension without naming the impact. You take on more because asking for relief feels embarrassingly exposed. And one day your body starts speaking for you. But headaches get louder. Sleep gets thinner. Patience disappears faster than it used to. Small inconveniences hit with weird emotional force. You are not overreacting. You are often underexpressing for far too long. Private people sometimes think they are protecting others from their emotions, but they are also protecting themselves from disappointment, from pity, from being minimized, from hearing advice when they needed witness, from being told they are too sensitive after finally being honest. So they keep the vault closed, even when it is getting heavy, even when holding everything is making them feel less real. Because another hidden consequence of secrecy is identity confusion. When you edit yourself constantly, you lose track of where the edits end. You start wondering who you are without the filters. Are you actually calm or just careful? Are you independent or just afraid of depending on anyone? Are you private or are you still protecting an old version of yourself? That question can shake people, especially the ones who built their whole life around being composed. Because composure gets rewarded. It makes you look responsible, thoughtful, grown, emotionally intelligent. And sometimes you are all those things. But sometimes composure is just grief wearing clean clothes. Sometimes it is fear speaking softly enough to sound wise. Sometimes it is a child inside you still trying not to make things harder. That does not make you broken. It makes your pattern understandable. And that matters more than most people realize. Because shame keeps these patterns frozen. Understanding begins to loosen them. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But enough to notice when silence is serving you and when it is swallowing you. That distinction changes everything. There is healthy privacy. And then there is disappearing inside yourself. Healthy privacy protects dignity. Emotional hiding protects old pain. Those two can look identical from the outside, but they feel very different in the body. One feels grounded. The other feels tight, lonely and strangely invisible even around people you love. If you keep everything to yourself, you are probably not trying to be mysterious. You are probably trying to stay regulated. You are probably trying to avoid feeling exposed without being held. You are probably trying to survive intimacy without losing control. That survival logic deserves compassion, but it also deserves honesty. Because there comes a point when the strategy that once protected you starts isolating you, not all at once, in tiny moments, in the unsent message, in the almost confession, in the pause before saying what you actually needed, in the joke that covered something serious, in the don't worry about it that really meant please notice anyway. That is the tragedy of quiet people. They often hope to be understood without having to fully reveal themselves. And sometimes they get angry when nobody understands. But invisibility has rules. People cannot consistently care for what they are never allowed to touch. That does not mean you need to tell everyone everything. It means being known requires more than being near someone. It requires risking a little truth. Just enough truth to stop abandoning yourself in real time. That might mean saying, I'm not doing great, instead of I'm just tired. It might mean asking for clarification instead of pretending something did not hurt. It might mean admitting you felt left out, overwhelmed, disappointed, or scared. Not because every feeling needs a spotlight, but because some feelings need air before they turn into walls. And that is what many private people do not notice at first. Silence feels like control, but over time, it can quietly become a prison you decorate with self-respect. You tell yourself nobody would get it anyway. Sometimes that is true. But sometimes, that is the old wound talking before the present gets a chance. There are people who can hold truth gently. There are conversations that do not punish honesty. There are relationships that get deeper the moment you stop performing steadiness. Still, I know why this is hard. Because once you become the silent one, people expect consistency from your silence. The first time you really open up, it can feel almost embarrassing, like speaking a language everyone assumed you did not have. You may even minimize your own feelings while saying them. You may laugh when the truth starts sounding too naked. You may say, It's dumb. Right before naming the thing that matters most. That is not weakness. That is what happens when vulnerability has gone unused for too long. It shakes when it first stands up. So if this is you, maybe the goal is not becoming radically open overnight. Maybe the goal is smaller and kinder than that. Maybe it is noticing the moment you disappear. Maybe it is catching the reflex that says, handle it alone. Maybe it is asking whether that reflex belongs to today or to years ago. Because not every instinct deserves permanent authority. Some instincts were built in survival mode, and survival mode is brilliant, but it is not always accurate. It can keep you safe from the past while stealing connection in the present. That is why people who keep everything to themselves often seem strong and lonely together. Their strength is real, so is their loneliness. One does not cancel the other. In fact, they often grow from the same root. The root is this. At some point, you learned that your inner world was safer in your own hands. And maybe it was. Maybe that lesson protected something precious in you. Maybe it helped you survive rooms that did not deserve your honesty. But you do not have to stay emotionally locked just because the lock once saved you. You are allowed to outgrow the version of strength built on invisibility. You are allowed to be private without being unreachable. You are allowed to be tearful without being completely hidden. And you are allowed to let someone meet you beyond your polished sentences someday. Because the truth is, the strongest people are not always the quietest ones. Sometimes they are the ones who finally stop carrying every feeling alone. Sometimes real strength is letting your life leave evidence on your face. Sometimes it is trusting that being understood is worth surviving a little exposure. And if you have spent years keeping everything to yourself, hear this clearly. Your silence makes sense. But your feelings still deserve a witness. And maybe healing begins the moment you stop treating your heart like classified information.